You heard Michael Ignatieff there mention Gerard and Gerard's great work. The man he's speaking about is Gerard Kennedy. He did the research into government infrastructure spending for the Liberal Party. He joins me now. Gerard, good to see you. And with the Conservatives, Pierre Pollievre is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. He joins me from Ottawa. Pierre, good to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Let me start with you, Gerard Kennedy. You surveyed, 940 or more stimulus projects out of 1,700.
That's right.
What did you find?
Well, we found that quite different from what Mr. Flaherty said, that they would start within 120 days, or that the Prime Minister in June said that 80% were happening. Only 12% have shovels in the ground. And we found as well that there was the delay, and the delays were attributed to the way the federal government, the Harper government, decided to go ahead with approving the projects, which was one by one. They gave themselves the decision-making power. They were told by the municipalities, by the Construction Association, and by a motion I put forward in Parliament that was approved by Parliament to move this money directly to municipalities, let them choose the project. But instead, we have a skew in favor of Conservative ridings and a slowdown that missed an entire construction season, so that most of the projects aren't happening this year, and the ones that are have just barely gotten underway.
Let's talk about the 12% just before we bring Pierre in on this. 12% you say have shovels in the ground.
Right.
How much of that is the fault of the government versus the municipalities and other levels of government they're working with? The site that you were at today in Burlington, the Conservatives say is a good example, because it's the mayor of Burlington and the municipal government there that has caused the delay, because they want that project to start in 2010.
Well, in fact, that project, and we've shared with the media a copy, that it was on the 2009 priority list for the city of Burlington. It was on the list.
But those priorities can change.
That was offered in January, but it wasn't a change in priorities. It was the 4.5 months that the government took to decide who would get the projects. They knew that there's a construction season, that there's a tendering season, and they decided to give that up. And they didn't follow the advice of the cities. And I mean, Mr. Jackson is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and he appeared with Mr. Barrett today, but they didn't put any facts on the table to actually assert that, there's only 2 out of 8 projects in Burlington that are going ahead. Across the country, quite a few less. We've put our lists publicly. They're on our website. People can see for themselves. What we're saying is they had a choice to do better, and they chose to do better for themselves.
Let me bring Pierre Pollievre in here. Pierre Pollievre, let me start with this question first. Is the government happy with the rate of these projects? Would you like to see this process be happening faster, in other words? Would you like to see more shovels in the ground?
Let's put this into perspective. Michael Ignatieff wants an election. Prime Minister Harper wants to focus on his economic action.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to find out simply, is the government happy with the speed at which these stimulus projects are progressing, or would you like to see it happen more quickly?
We're happy. That's because Prime Minister Harper has an economic action plan. The action plan creates jobs with construction projects right across the country. Those projects are selected by the municipalities, approved by the provinces, and then partially funded by the federal government. 2 things you need to know about them. 1, the municipalities can begin building anytime they want, and the federal government will pay the bills within 30 days of receiving an invoice. The second thing you need to know is that the conspiracy theory that Mr. Ignatieff is peddling around is really as follows. He's suggesting that thousands of municipalities across Canada and 13 provincial and territorial governments, many of them Liberal and NDP governments, are conspiring to try and help Conservative Party MPs get a biased share of the infrastructure in this country. That is simply not credible.
Let's just get a response from Gerard Kennedy on that last point.
It doesn't make, what Mr. Pollievre, with all respect, is saying, it doesn't make sense. It's political horse trading. The government sat down with the provincial government and said, these are the projects that we want. If they didn't want to do that horse trading and the old-fashioned political pork barreling, they would have sent the money to municipalities and said, you choose. Municipalities had to submit an application and then get stamped the approval from the federal government. And there were holdups. We just got British Columbia projects announced today that should have been announced in the spring. Nova Scotia got held up for months and months. Quebec, the same thing. And, in every single case, Mr. Pollievre would say it's a coincidence that in every project fund, in every province, the Conservative ridings are getting up to 40%, 400%, 13 times as much on a per riding basis, so comparing apples and apples.
Let me get the facts. I've got
Any
the facts
voter
here.
out there, just let me say this first, Pierre Pollievre, if you don't mind. Any cynic out there would say, voters expect this. There's political
No, I don't
horse
expect
trading,
that at all.
whether it's a conservative government or a liberal government or an NDP government.
There's a difference here. This was about creating jobs.
When
the only way to
you're
justify
ready,
all this
I'll have the
infrastructure
facts
spending
for you.
was to get the jobs to employ people.
Yeah.
And instead,
Okay.
we got the size of New Brunswick workforce laid off and no jobs created. I mean, that's the difference here. This was
I think
meant
Mr.
to
Kennedy
be,
would like to
let's
avoid
hear from-
having me
let's
speak.
from Pierre.
Okay, this is going to be
Go ahead.
particularly
Not at all, Mr.
devastating for Mr. Ignatieff. I have here Mr. Kennedy's own report. Now, this report lists the top ridings that received money in Ontario. The top of the list
including your own.
is Windsor-Tecumseh. That was the #1 recipient of federal infrastructure money.
But
And guess what? It's an
6 of those
NDP
are cabinet
riding.
ministers,
I've got a
including
second.
Mr. Pollievre.
I've got a second fact. That's a riding of the NDP. The second fact I have here: Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Ignatieff held a big photo op in front of a field today in Burlington. They said that construction should be underway in that field. Well, I have the application for the park that is supposed to be built there. I have it in my hands right here. And this is what the original application said. The start date is May the 3rd, 2010. It was not by the city of Burlington, was not scheduled to begin for 7 more months. Yet Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Ignatieff held a photo op there today. It looks like they really stepped in it on their facts on that one.
Not at all.
We've touched on that already. Pierre Pollievre, let me ask you this. 1,700 stimulus projects across the country. How many would you say are currently underway with shovels in the ground?
As many as the cities are prepared to start building. They have a green light. They can start this minute,
Well,
and within 30 days of beginning their construction, the federal government will be prepared to reimburse their invoices.
All right.
Well, that's just a shrugging off of responsibility. That's what that is.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you both very much for joining us today. Pierre Pollievre, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister in Ottawa, and Gerard Kennedy, the Liberal infrastructure critic with me here in Toronto. Thank you both very much.
Good to be with you.